Alright, today on 5-Minute Theory we are going to be talking about the Smith-Morra Gambit. Now, this is not meant to be some sort of high-level theoretical investigation. I want to give you guys a brief overview of the opening, some of the main ideas, and also show a couple traps. Now, the Smith-Morra Gambit is an opening against the Sicilian Defense, which starts off 1 c5, and then we go 2 d4. Now, the idea is not to take back and bring our queen out early. This would be a bad decision, but instead to offer black a second pawn to capture. Now, black can refuse the Smith-Morra Gambit by playing d3. Another popular way is to play g6, but today we're going to consider what happens if they accept the gambit and take the c3 pawn, and knight takes c3. Now here, it's true, white is down a pawn. There's no way to recover it. None of black's pawns are at the moment weak. But in exchange for our pawn, we have control of the center. We have one piece in the game compared to 0, but also we have very quick development, very quick freedom of development. It will only take white 3 moves to castle, for black 5. White can get a rook to the c-file in as short as 2 turns. That same maneuver would take white 4 moves to do. So white has tempo, white has few free moves, control of the center, and one piece developed already. Alright, so let's play some standard opening moves for black. Knight c6. Knight f3. Now already, a common mistake I see is black will also try to develop their second knight. At any moment when black brings this knight into the game, without covering up the e5 square enough, white will simply go e5 himself, and that's sort of an embarrassment to this knight. It has no good squares to go to. Knight g4, attacking the pawn, probably also not particularly effective. Can simply go bishop f4. Okay, so followed by h3. So instead, black typically will choose to cover the e5 square before developing this knight. White plays bishop c4, very aggressive post for the bishop, knight f6, and castle. Now again, knight f6 is not forced. Black has other moves as well. e6 blunting the bishop, a6 covering the b5 square, which is important. There are lots of choices for black. Let's play knight f6 and develop, and castle. Now, one very common mistake I see already in this position is black will try to play this like some sort of Najdorf, or they'll just want to control some center squares and play e5. And that is a huge mistake. Okay, again, the weakening of this diagonal, the pawn, the e-pawn, can no longer go backwards to e6, so white just goes knight g5, and whoops, we have a problem on f7. So a much better move is to play e6. a6 first is also playable. e6, queen e2, and at some juncture black will need to include the move a6. Why? Well, for example, let's say black just develops with the intention of castling. We can play rook d1. Now the point is, there is already a pin with threats on the d-file, so if black continues to be lazy and castles, again we see the move e5, which is just pretty much crushing. Of course, black cannot take. Remember the pin, and also, again, moving the knight in this case will really not work. The bishop is going to be completely lost. So, instead, black needs to escape the rook. And the most logical square would be queen c7, but now we see why the a6 move is so important. The black queen can be hit by the knight immediately. So instead, let's try a6, rook d1, same move, queen c7, and now at least there's no knight b5. Now white wants to continue developing very logically, bishop f4, lining up directly at the queen. Other moves are playable too, bishop e3. But basically what white is doing is preparing the rook c1 maneuver we talked about earlier. Bishop e7, and now rook to c1. More or less, we're here at a key moment, alright? The queen does want to typically move out of the way of this rook. For example, one tactic, let's play a very, very, very lazy and ineffective move here for black, like h6. One tactic we often see in the Smith-Morra is the move knight d5, and here it's doubly effective because after pawn takes, this knight cannot move. There are lots of problems, okay? So, for that reason, the queen often decides to move away from the scope of the rook on the c1, sometimes even as far back as queen b8. Alright, this is more or less the end of our discussion today. I wanted to give you guys an introduction to the Smith-Morra as well as see some of the traps. If you are interested in this opening, I highly recommend looking into it. White gives up a pawn, but in exchange, all of the pieces find good squares. The rooks come to the middle to open lines where we can create threats. White's development and coordination is quite good. Black, if black can unravel their pieces successfully, of course will have an extra pawn, but doing that is not quite as easy as it looks. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please remember to rate it, leave a comment if you want to, and subscribe.